Hello, everyone, and thank you for your time today. My name is Simone Kramer, and I'm the head of product for the Net Zero Data Public Utility, or NZDPU for short. Good information is the lifeblood of good decision-making for businesses, financial institutions, policymakers, and civil society. High-quality, decision-useful data is essential for tackling climate change. To put it simply, and to borrow one of Mike Bloomberg's staple quotes, if you can measure it, you can manage it. Companies and investors have increasingly recognized that climate change presents significant financial risk, but also offers vast opportunities. The more they know about both, including the sources of emissions that drive climate change, the faster they can act. Increased data disclosure and accessibility enables quicker course corrections, essential given the criticality and immediacy of the climate crisis. That being said, today there are numerous challenges associated with climate transition-related data, largely due to its nascency. I like to think about climate data today as comparable to financial data at the onset of modern accounting principles. A key challenge that we at the NZDPU have considered is the issue of inconsistent disclosure, data collection, and provision practices. From a disclosure standpoint, preparers of climate transition-related data are challenged to report across multiple standards and frameworks, which commonly define basic disclosure elements in different ways. Even where such disclosure elements are aligned, the methodologies underlying how to calculate the relevant data can differ, and there is not always transparency as to how calculations were provided. In these cases, even if data is disclosed, since disclosure approaches are not standard across various preparers, when different data providers capture the same information in slightly different ways, using their own definitions, in order to seek to normalize data across their offerings, we inevitably see a compounding of inconsistency, creating both challenges and risk for an end user seeking to accurately aggregate data across providers. And that's assuming that firms disclose, which is a continued challenge, even for some of the most foundational climate transition-related data. Today, only around 30 to 40% of publicly listed companies report their Scope 1 and 2 GHG emissions, and that number drops off significantly when it comes to Scope 3. To come back to my earlier comparison of climate data to financial data, these challenges aren't inherently new to the data space. But what does make them unique is the element of time. We do not have the luxury to spend multiple decades correcting the challenge of providing the market with the fundamental layer of climate transition-related information needed to effectively integrate climate into corporate strategy and investment decision-making. In response to these challenges and the need to accelerate action rapidly, in June of 2022, the Climate Data Steering Committee was launched by French President Emmanuel Macron and UN Special Envoy for Climate Ambitions and Solutions, Michael R. Bloomberg. The Climate Data Steering Committee brought together global regulators, policymakers, financial service providers, and civil society organizations to advise on the key data needed to support and accelerate the transition to net zero. In the CDSC's white paper, Recommendations for the Development of the Net Zero Data Public Utility, released at COP27 this past November after a public consultation held in the fall, the committee recommended the development of a public data utility that allows for open access to climate transition-related data published from entities across the globe, with the goal of designing the utility to be a part of the UNFCCC's Global Climate Action Portal. This paper outlines some of the pervasive data gaps inhibiting the transition to net zero and the committee's recommendations for the development of the utility. The white paper recommendations cover two key areas. First, data challenges and recommendations for how to solve those challenges through NZDPU requirements, focusing not only on climate transition-related data points, but also on key metadata considerations. For example, within the white paper, there are extensive details around the means in which it is recommended that firms disclose Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. But to support this, there are additional insights provided as to how preparers should consider reporting and providing greater transparency on areas such as organizational boundaries. From a quality standpoint, greater granularity around practices for disclosing assurance and verification provision at the field level are also encouraged. In order to address these many data challenges, it is important to think holistically about the data point itself, the transparency surrounding its origination, and the means for a user to assess quality. The second area of focus for the CDSC recommendations cover product functionality recommendations. These lay out a deep focus on usability across the wide range of use cases relevant to a utility for climate transition-related data. Bringing the data to one centralized place with a common foundational data model is the first step, but it is equally important that the data be easy to access and use on behalf of the many different end users who wish to incorporate this information in their analysis and workflows. Fast forwarding to today, the NZDPU team is working to build out the beta pilot of the Net Zero Data Public Utility, with a goal to release this pilot at COP28 this fall. We will focus on building out the phase 1 requirements introduced to the CDSC recommendations, which entail developing a pilot utility featuring voluntary disclosure to the utility across standardized emissions metrics for corporates and select financial institutions, alongside a beta data model for capturing emissions reduction target data for corporates. We will incorporate available standards and jurisdictional requirements to the NZDPU data model and seek to provide a common data model with a derived mapping across fields as is feasible. This is only the beginning. And as can be seen in the white paper, we have significant additional product scope to achieve in subsequent releases. Our hope is that through this beta pilot, we are able to promote a step towards unprecedented accountability on the net zero transition with support from the largest financial data providers, including Bloomberg, London Stock Exchange Group, Moody's, Morningstar, MSCI, and S&P Global, governments, including Chile, the European Commission and EFRAG, Gabon, France, Singapore, Switzerland, and the UK, and international organizations and global standard setters, including the Financial Stability Board, the International Energy Agency, IOSCO, ISSB, NGFS, the OECD, CDP, and the United Nations. Thank you for your time today. We look forward to sharing our solution with you in the UAE this fall.